The dust of the Coalsville road tasted like regret. For Caleb Holt, each particle was a memory of the 5 years he'd lost behind the granite walls of Ironwood Penitentiary. Freedom wasn't a clean slate, it was this: a searing sun, a tired horse, and the wary eyes of a town that had already tried and convicted him long ago. Coalsville wasn't just faded, it was fossilized. The false-fronted buildings seemed to lean away from him as he passed. The air, thick with the smells of hot pine and horse manure, was a relic from a life he'd been forcibly removed from. He reined in his mare outside the Gilded Spur, the saloon's name a monument to misplaced optimism. His boots hit the dirt, and the sound was hollow. The state had given him these clothes, but they didn't fit the man he was now. His shoulders were broader from breaking rock, his hands rougher, his spirit whittled down to a core of grim resolve. The beard hid the thin white scar along his jaw, a permanent reminder of the night his temper had rewritten his destiny. The saloon doors swung inward at his touch. The din of conversation didn't just die, it was murdered. All eyes turned to him, a gallery of suspicion. He was a ghost walking into his own wake. "Heard you was out." A voice cut through the silence. It belonged to Silas Croft, the saloon owner, his face a roadmap of old grudges. "Didn't think you'd have the gall to come back here, Holt." Caleb kept his hat in his hands, a deliberate gesture of non-threat. "Just looking for work, Silas. Nothing more." A laugh, sharp and humorless, came from a corner table. Jedediah Cox, a man whose girth was matched only by his spite, stood up. "Work," he sneered. "That's rich. What kind of work you qualified for? Grave digging? You got experience with that at least." The old label, the one that defined him, settled like a shroud. Killer. He had practiced his response in the echoing quiet of his cell. "I served my time, 5 years. I paid for what I did. I just want to earn a wage." "Men like you don't pay their debt," Cox retorted, taking a step closer. "You just carry it with you, infecting everything you touch. This town don't want your kind. Ride on." The bartender, not meeting Caleb's eyes, added the final nail. "We don't serve convicts." It was a polite way of saying he was less than human. The rest of the afternoon was a parade of closed doors and averted gazes. The liveryman, the blacksmith, even the preacher, all found a reason to turn him away. By the time the sun began to bleed into the western hills, a familiar despair was closing in. His stomach ached with a hollow hunger, and his mare's head hung low. He was a ghost, and ghosts couldn't build a life. It was then he saw the confrontation at the edge of town. A woman stood beside a weather-beaten wagon, its wood silvered by the sun. Facing her was a man in a suit too fine for the prairie, his boots polished to a predatory shine. "Mrs. Sallow," the man's voice was smooth as oil. "The facts are the facts. Your husband's debts did not die with him. The bank's patience, however, is terminal. The mortgage is due in 90 days. I don't see a path for you." "The name is Eliza," she fired back, her voice not raised, but honed to a sharp edge. Her dark hair was tied back severely, but strands had escaped, framing a face that was all fierce angles and quiet exhaustion. Her dress was patched, but clean. "The herd will be driven to the railhead in Laramie before the first snow. We will make the payment." The banker, Alistair Finch, offered a smile that didn't touch his eyes. "You have 30 head, Eliza, if the wolves or the drought don't take them. My offer for the land is more than generous. It saves you the indignity of failure." "Generous?" Her green eyes, the color of a deep forest pool, flashed. "It's half its value, and you know it. Do not mistake my situation for stupidity, Mr. Finch." A young boy, maybe 7 or 8, peeked out from behind the wagon wheel. He clutched a crudely carved wooden bird to his chest, his eyes wide with the understanding no child should possess. "Mama!" His small voice wavered. Eliza placed a single, firm hand on his shoulder, pulling him behind her skirts without ever breaking her stare down with Finch. In that gesture, Caleb saw a fortress of will. She was a woman who had become her own army. Something in him, something he thought the prison had beaten dead, stirred. He found his feet moving toward them, ignoring every instinct for self-preservation. "Name's Caleb Holt," he said, stopping a respectful distance away. I'm in need of work, if you've got any. Eliza Sallow turned her gaze on him. It was a comprehensive assessment, taking in his worn clothes, his wary posture, the history that clung to him like a shadow. He saw the calculation in her eyes, the weighing of risk against desperate need. What kind of work? She asked, her tone neutral. Anything that needs doing, fences, roofs, breaking horses. I'm not afraid of long days. The pause that followed was heavy with the future. Then a single sharp nod. $15 a month, room in the loft, meals included. You work hard, you protect my son and my land, and you leave your past at my gate. Do we have an understanding? We do, Caleb said, the words feeling foreign. A chance, a thread to cling to. You won't regret it. See that I don't, she replied, and in her eyes he saw the immense gamble she was taking. The Sallow place, which Eliza still called Wildwood, was a half-day's ride south. It was a small, sturdy cabin, nestled in a valley that seemed to hold its breath. The land was beautiful, but bruised. The barn sagged wearily, the corral fence listed like a drunkard's smile, and the fields were fighting a losing battle against the relentless weeds. Yet, Caleb could see the good bones beneath the neglect. This was a place worth fighting for. The boy, Samuel, was a silent shadow that first day, his eyes following Caleb's every move as he set to work on the corral. Why is your voice so rough? Samuel finally asked, his curiosity overpowering his shyness. Too much dust, Caleb replied, driving a new post into the hard earth, and not enough talking to decent folk for a while. Samuel considered this. Are you a bad man? Caleb stopped, setting down the heavy maul. He knelt, bringing himself to the boy's eye level. I did a bad thing, Samuel, a long time ago. I hurt a man, and he died. I was punished for it. Now I'm just trying to do better. Ma says every soul deserves a chance to find its way back, the boy said, his faith a simple, powerful thing. Your ma, Caleb said, a strange tightness in his chest, is a very wise woman. The work was a brutal welcome bomb. Dawn until dusk, he mended, built, and broke. Eliza was a constant, quiet force, managing the ledgers by lamplight, her hands equally skilled with a needle or a skillet. She began to leave a tin cup of coffee for him on a fence post in the mornings. She didn't smile often, but when she did, it was like a crack of sunlight through a storm cloud. One evening, a sudden autumn squall trapped them in the barn. The wind howled like a banshee, and rain hammered the roof. Samuel, exhausted, fell asleep in a nest of hay. Eliza came in, a lantern swinging in her hand, its light catching the fine lines of worry and strength on her face. Caleb, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. He turned, the sound of his name on her lips a jolt to his system. She moved closer, the scent of lavender and hard soap cutting through the smell of hay and horse. What really happened in Blackwater? The question hung in the air, not an accusation, but a key offered. He let out a long breath, the memory a cold stone in his gut. His name was Jeb the Jackal Corwin. He was a bully with a fast draw and a slow conscience. He was drunk, harassing a girl who worked at the inn. I told him to leave her be. He went for his gun. I was faster. Caleb's jaw tightened. I didn't have to kill him. I could have winged him. But in that split second, all I saw was the chance to put a monster in the ground. So I did. The judge called it manslaughter, but I've always known the truth. It was an execution. Eliza was silent for a long moment, her gaze steady on him. A man's past is a heavy burden, she said finally, but it doesn't have to be his future. I've watched you with Samuel. I've seen the care you take with the animals. That's not the work of a cold-hearted killer. It's the work of a man trying to mend what's broken. Her hand came to rest on his forearm. The contact was electric, a simple human touch after years of isolation. It was a warmth he had forgotten existed. I haven't been close to anyone in a long time, he confessed, the words raw. Eliza's eyes softened. She leaned in, the lantern light painting gold in her irises. We'll see, she whispered. And in the storm-lashed barn, with the boy sleeping nearby, the ground between them shifted irrevocably. The fragile peace they built was not to last. The gossip from Coalsville carried on the wind and by spiteful tongues, soon found its way to Wildwood. Eliza returned from town one day, her posture rigid, a barely contained storm cloud. "The women at the general store have decided I've lost my mind," she stated, unpacking supplies with sharp, angry movements. "They say I'm inviting a wolf into the henhouse. Worse, Samuel came home from the one-room schoolhouse with a black eye. When pressed, he admitted another boy had said his mother was shacking up with a murderer." The next day, Sheriff Isom Rook rode into the yard. He was a tall, weathered man who wore his authority like a well-fitted coat. He dismounted with a sigh, as if he'd been expecting this. "Eliza?" He nodded. Then his eyes found Caleb. "Holt." "Sheriff," Caleb acknowledged, his hands pausing their work on a harness. "There's talk, Eliza," Rook began, choosing his words carefully. "Having a man with his particular history around a woman and a child, it makes folks nervous." "About what?" Eliza's voice was ice. "About the fact that he works from sunup to sundown? That he's teaching my son how to whittle and fish? What precisely are they nervous about, Sheriff?" "About the company he kept in prison," the sheriff said, his gaze shifting back to Caleb. "I hear you took a liking to law books, Holt. Folks find that peculiar. A man who studies the law after breaking it. Makes them wonder what he's planning." Caleb felt a hot flush of anger, but he kept his voice level. "I studied the law to understand how a moment could cost a man 5 years of his life. It didn't make me more dangerous, Sheriff. It made me less of a fool." The sheriff looked from Caleb's calm defiance to Eliza's unwavering support. He saw a family, not a crisis. He tipped his hat. "Just doing my job, ma'am. You be careful." But the real threat arrived later that week, not in the form of the law, but of the lawless. Alistair Finch rode out with Jedediah Cox and 2 other hard-faced men. Their smiles were thin and predatory. "Eliza," Finch crooned, his voice slick, "we're here as concerned citizens. A woman in your delicate position needs stability. A protector. Think of the boy." "Get off my land, Finch," she snapped. "My son doesn't need a protector who preys on widows." Jedediah Cox took a step forward, his hand drifting suggestively toward the pistol on his hip. "Maybe the boy needs a man who can show him how to be a man, not some convict who's probably filling his head with nonsense." Caleb saw red. The old Caleb, the one from Blackwater, roared to the surface, his fists clenched, every muscle coiling to strike. He wanted to smash Cox's smug face, to show them the animal they all believed him to be. But then he saw Samuel's terrified face peeking from the cabin window. He saw Eliza standing her ground, a lioness protecting her cub. He saw the future he was trying to build, fragile as a bird's egg. He took a deep, shuddering breath. He unclenched his fists. "The boy is learning kindness," Caleb said, his voice dangerously quiet. "Something you clearly know nothing about. You were asked to leave." Finch's smile finally vanished, replaced by a cold, calculating stare. "Winter is coming, Eliza. It's unforgiving. My offer will not be so generous after the first snow." They rode out, but the chill they left behind had nothing to do with the weather. Later, inside the safety of the cabin, Eliza finally broke, not with tears but with a furious, whispered intensity. She pulled a small, locked box from beneath a floorboard. Inside were not trinkets but papers, ledgers, deeds, letters. "Finch doesn't just want my land," she said, her fingers tracing a column of figures. "He's done this to 6 families in this county. He finds a weakness, a death, a drought, and he squeezes until they break. This Summit and Vale Trust he uses, it's a ghost, a shell company to hide his tracks." Caleb stared at the evidence. It was a web of corruption, and they were caught in the center of it. "This doesn't change what I did," he said softly. "It doesn't bring Jeb Corwin back." "No," Eliza agreed, her gaze fierce. "But it tells us why Finch wants you gone. You're an inconvenience, a man who's seen violence, who isn't easily intimidated, and maybe he's afraid of what else you might have seen." She looked from the papers to Caleb, a new, dangerous plan forming in her eyes. "We don't fight them with fists in the yard. We fight them with this." She tapped the ledger. "We fight them with the truth." Caleb looked at Eliza, at the fierce hope in her eyes. He looked at Samuel, sleeping peacefully now, trusting that the adults would keep the monsters at bay. For the first time since riding into Coalsville, he didn't feel like an ex-convict. He felt like a man with a purpose. He had a family to protect and a war to win, not with a gun, but with the very law he'd once fallen afoul of. If you're listening now, feeling the weight of Caleb's past and the threat of that coming winter, then you understand the stakes. Where are you right now, listening to this story? Tell me in the comments. And if you need to know how a man fights a shadowy enemy with paper and proof, you need to subscribe. Because the battle for Wildwood is just beginning, and the next chapter changes everything. The truth, once uncovered, became a live wire in their hands. The cabin at Wildwood was no longer just a shelter. It was a war room. By the guttering light of a single kerosene lamp, Eliza spread her evidence across the rough-hewn table. Deeds, promissory notes, letters penned in desperation. Each document was a thread in the noose Alistair Finch had woven for the desperate. "He preys on grief," Eliza whispered, her finger tracing the signature of a widow from the next county. "He gave her a week after her husband's funeral before he called the loan. She had 3 children. She had no choice." Caleb watched her, the fierce concentration on her face. He was a man of action, of direct confrontation. This silent war of ink and numbers felt alien, but he saw its power. "What's our move?" "We find the pattern," she said, her voice gaining strength. "We find someone who isn't afraid to stand with us. Someone inside the town who sees what Finch is." That someone, they hoped, was Deputy Elias Pike. He was a quiet man, often seen mending his own fences on his day off, his gaze more thoughtful than most. Caleb approached him cautiously the next market day, finding him at the smithy, waiting for a horse to be shod. "Deputy," Caleb began, keeping his voice low. "Holt," Pike nodded, his eyes assessing. "Heard you're working for Eliza Sallow." "I am, and we've found something that stinks worse than a week-old carcass." He laid out the barest bones of it, the repeated foreclosures, the Summit and Vale Trust, the timing that always coincided with tragedy. Pike listened, his expression unreadable. When Caleb finished, the deputy spat a stream of tobacco juice into the dust. "Finch is a pillar of this community, Holt, a church deacon. You're an ex-convict with a grudge." He fixed Caleb with a hard stare. "But my sister was the widow in Cedar Creek, the one with the 3 children. She lives in a rented room in Laramie now, works as a seamstress. She lost everything." A long silence stretched between them, filled with the ringing of the blacksmith's hammer. "What do you need?" Pike asked finally. "A name," Caleb said. "Just one other person who's been ruined by him. Someone who might be willing to talk." Pike looked toward the bank, its brick facade standing smug and solid. "Old man Henderson, the livery. Finch called his loan after his son died of fever. Said the business was too much of a risk without an heir to run it. Henderson's a bitter man. He might talk to you." Old man Henderson was indeed bitter, a desiccated figure haunting the dusty interior of his own livery. He spat on the ground when Caleb mentioned Finch's name. "That snake," he hissed, "came to me wearing a smile, talking about consolidation and minimizing loss. Sold my stable for a song to one of his associates." He squinted at Caleb. "You're the one staying with the Sallow woman. You stirring up trouble for him?" "I'm trying to stop him," Caleb replied. A grim, toothy smile split Henderson's wrinkled face. "Good. I got nothing left to lose. I kept a copy of the bill of sale. The name on it is Jedediah Cox." The pieces clicked into place with a cold, final clarity. Cox wasn't just a loudmouth. He was Finch's strong-arm man, the public face of his acquisitions. He was the threat that made the paper threats real. But Finch was not a man to be cornered lightly. His retaliation was swift and brutal. A week later, Caleb rode the fence line to find a half-mile of posts sawn through and wire cut, their small herd of cattle wandering onto the open range. It was a warning, costly and time-consuming to fix. Then the fire. It started in the hayloft. The acrid smell of smoke woke Caleb in the dead of night. He moved on instinct, honed by years of reacting to sudden danger. He didn't shout, didn't panic. He burst into the main cabin. "Fire! Get Samuel out, now!" he commanded Eliza. He didn't wait for a reply. He was a blur of motion, hauling water from the well, soaking blankets, and charging into the barn. The heat was immense, the smoke a choking fog. He fought with a controlled fury, not against the flames, but for the future they represented, for the loft he slept in, for the horse he rode, for the boy who trusted him. Eliza, her face a mask of terror and determination, formed a bucket line with Samuel, passing water until their arms ached. Together, they beat back the inferno, saving the main structure of the barn, though the loft was lost. As dawn broke, they stood amidst the charred and smoking ruin, coughing, their faces smudged with soot. Samuel trembled, clutching his mother's leg. Eliza's shoulders shook, not from cold, but from the sheer, terrifying violation of it. Caleb's calm finally shattered. The man from Blackwater surfaced, his eyes burning with a cold fire. He walked to the woodpile, took up his axe, and began to sharpen it with long, deliberate strokes. The sound was a promise of violence. "Caleb, no," Eliza said, her voice raw from smoke. "He crossed the line," Caleb stated, his tone flat and deadly. "He threatened you. He threatened Samuel. This ends now. And if you kill him, what then? You go back to Ironwood, or you hang, and what becomes of us?" She stepped in front of him, placing her hand on the axe handle. "You told me you were trying to be better. Being better means being smarter. It means winning." He looked from her resolute face to Samuel's terrified eyes. The axe felt heavy in his hands, a tool of the old life. He let it clatter to the ground. "Then what?" he asked, the fight draining out of him, leaving only exhaustion. "Then we use it," she said, her gaze turning toward town. This wasn't a warning. It was a mistake. They rode into Coalsville, not as victims, but as accusers. They went straight to Sheriff Rook, still smelling of smoke. Eliza laid out their evidence with a chilling precision. Henderson's bill of sale to Cox, the pattern of foreclosures, and now the arson. "This is beyond a debt collection, Sheriff," she said, her voice cutting through the stuffy office. "This is attempted murder. He tried to burn us out, with my son inside." Sheriff Rook listened, his initial skepticism crumbling under the weight of their soot-stained conviction and the cold, hard facts. The involvement of his deputy, Pike, who confirmed his sister's story, tipped the scales. "Finch is a powerful man," Rook warned, but his hand was already reaching for his hat. "Not anymore," Caleb said. They found Finch in his bank, presiding over his little kingdom. The smug assurance on his face faltered when Sheriff Rook, Caleb, Eliza, and Deputy Pike walked in, followed by a curious crowd that had gathered at the commotion. "Sheriff, what is the meaning of this?" Finch blustered. "Alistair Finch," Rook's voice boomed in the vaulted room. "I'm placing you under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud, extortion, and attempted arson." The crowd gasped. Finch's face went pale, then mottled with rage. "This is absurd. On the word of a convict and a hysterical widow. On the word of multiple witnesses. And this," Eliza said, holding up Henderson's bill of sale, "and the testimony of Deputy Pike regarding the foreclosure of his sister's property in Cedar Creek. Your Summit and Vale Trust is a sham, and we have the paper trail to prove it. It was Jedediah Cox who sealed their fate. Seeing the game was up, he lunged for Caleb, a derringer appearing in his hand like magic. You ruined it all!" The shot was deafening in the confined space, but it was Deputy Pike who moved faster, his own Colt clearing leather and firing once. Cox crumpled, clutching his shoulder, the derringer skittering across the polished floor. In the stunned silence that followed, Finch's facade crumbled completely. The polished banker was gone, replaced by a cornered, venomous creature. "You think this is over?" he spat at Caleb, his eyes wild. "You have no idea what you've stepped in. The man I answer to, he doesn't forgive debts, he collects, and his price is always, always blood." The words hung in the air, a new, more terrifying threat. The arrest was a victory, but Finch's warning was a chasm opening at their feet. They had cut the head off the snake, but a larger, more venomous body still writhed in the shadows. As Finch was led away in handcuffs, the townspeople looked at Caleb not with suspicion, but with a dawning, uncertain respect. He had not fought with his fists. He had fought with the truth, and he had won. But back at Wildwood, as they surveyed the scorched skeleton of the barn, Finch's final words echoed in the quiet. The man I answer to. His price is always blood. The battle for the ranch was over. A war, it seemed, had just begun. A victory, but at what cost? The enemy you know is in chains, but the one you don't is still out there. If you're listening, feeling that chill of a bigger threat on the horizon, tell me where you are in the comments. And if you need to know who this shadowy figure is and what price he will demand from Caleb and Eliza, you must subscribe, because the final chapter of the Judas brand will test the very soul of every character you've come to care about. Victory, they learned, was a fragile skin over a festering wound. Alistair Finch sat in a cell, but his final warning was a poison in the well of their peace. The name he hadn't spoken hung over Wildwood like a coming storm. They rebuilt the barn, the scent of fresh-cut pine a deliberate act of defiance. The townsfolk of Coalsville, chastened and grateful, offered hands and timber, but Caleb's eyes were constantly drawn to the horizon. He slept with his rifle by the door, his ears straining for the sound of a stranger's horse. The shadow revealed itself a month later, not with thunder, but with a whisper. A man rode into town, dressed not in ranch denim or banker's broadcloth, but in a tailored black suit that seemed to drink the sunlight. He was tall, gaunt, with fingers too long for his hands, and a smile that was a mere tightening of the lips. He carried a leather-bound ledger, not a gun. His name was Silas Rookwood, and he was Finch's silent partner. He didn't come to the ranch. He went to the sheriff's office and presented papers that were crisp, legal, and terrifying. He was the majority shareholder and legal executor of the Summit and Vale Trust. All of Finch's assets, including every outstanding mortgage and foreclosed property he held, now belonged to him, including the dead on Wildwood. Sheriff Rook, his face ashen, rode out to deliver the news himself. "The paperwork is ironclad," he said, his voice heavy with a helpless anger. "He owns the note, Eliza. He's calling it due, in full, 30 days. Eliza felt the ground drop away. "He can't do that. The evidence, Finch's crimes." "This man's layers are deep," the sheriff interrupted. "He's insulated himself completely. The crimes belong to Finch. The assets, legally, belong to Rookwood." Rookwood's next move was a masterstroke of cruelty. He didn't threaten or bluster. He called a town meeting in the church. He stood before the pulpit, a secular devil in a house of God, and explained the new economic realities. "My associate, Mr. Finch, engaged in regrettable practices," he said, his voice a dry rustle. "But the contracts he secured are legally binding. I'm here to offer you all a choice, a final settlement. I will forgive 50% of your outstanding debts to the trust." A hopeful murmur rippled through the room. "In exchange," Rookwood continued, his cold eyes sweeping over them, "you will sign over to me the mineral rights to your land in perpetuity." The murmur died. The coal seams running under these valleys were the people's last hope, their final inheritance. He wasn't just asking for their money. He was asking for their future. "And if we refuse?" a voice called out. It was Old Man Henderson. Rookwood's thin smile was chilling. "Then the full debt is payable immediately. I will have no choice but to foreclose and seize the land itself. I would hate to see more good people displaced." He had turned the town against itself. He had made Eliza and Caleb the reason for their ruin. If Wildwood fought, if they held out, everyone else would pay the price. The grateful glances they had received turned to anxious, resentful stares. The pressure became a physical weight. Fences were cut again, this time by desperate neighbors. A rock was thrown through the Sallow's window with a note tied to it. "Take the deal, don't be selfish." Caleb saw the light in Eliza dimming, the fierce hope being crushed by this inexorable legal evil. Samuel became quiet and withdrawn, sensing the adult fear that permeated their home. One night, as Caleb stood watch on the porch, Eliza joined him, her shawl pulled tight against the cold. "We can't ask them to fall on their swords for us," she said, her voice hollow. "We can't be the reason the Hendersons of this world lose everything." "So we just give up?" Caleb asked, the frustration a hot coal in his chest. "We give him your land? Your father's land?" "I don't know," she cried, the sound tearing from her. "I have fought for so long, Caleb. I'm so tired." It was in that moment of shared despair that Caleb's past ceased to be a chain and became a key. The law books he'd studied in Ironwood, the intricate web of contracts and clauses Finch had used, he saw the flaw. The only way to fight a monster of paper was with a sharper paper sword. The mineral rights, he said, his voice suddenly steady. He doesn't want the land. He wants what's under it. But he can't mine it if he doesn't own the surface. If we force him to foreclose, he gets the land, but the process will tie him up in courts for years. He's a businessman. He wants a quick, clean profit, not a long, messy fight. Eliza looked at him, a flicker of her old fire returning. What are you saying? I'm saying we call his bluff. We don't pay. We let him foreclose, but we do it publicly. We make it so messy and so public that his investors, whoever they are, will see it as a liability, not an asset. The plan was born of desperation, but it was their last stand. They went back to Deputy Pike and Old Man Henderson. They went to every family holding a debt from the trust. Caleb, the ex-convict scholar, laid out the strategy. Don't sign his deal, he told them. Force him to foreclose on all of us, all at once. A dozen foreclosures will draw attention. Newspaper attention. Federal attention. He's a spider who thrives in the dark. We flood his web with light. It was a terrifying gamble. They were betting their homes on the hope that Rookwood's greed was greater than his patience. The final confrontation took place not in a dusty street, but in the Coalsville land office. Rookwood was there, ready to file the foreclosure papers on Wildwood. He seemed amused by their presence. A last-minute payment, Mrs. Sallow? He asked, his pen poised. No, Mr. Rookwood, Eliza said, her voice clear and carrying. We are here to formally contest the foreclosure and to announce that we will be filing a countersuit for fraudulent conveyance, alleging that the transfer of the debt from Finch to you was a sham to shield illicit assets. Rookwood's pen stilled. His amused smile vanished. Before he could speak, the door to the land office opened. Old Man Henderson walked in, then the Miller family, then the widow Clay. One by one, every debtor he had threatened filed into the small room, a silent, resolute army. We're all contesting, Henderson said, his voice strong, and we've sent a letter to the territorial marshal. Together. Rookwood looked from face to face. He saw not fear, but a unified, stubborn defiance. He saw the years of legal battles, the scrutiny, the ruin of his clean, profitable scheme. The cost of winning had just become astronomically high. For a long moment, the only sound was the ticking of the clock on the wall. The spider had been dragged into the light. Slowly, deliberately, Rookwood closed his ledger. He stood, his expression one of cold, professional disappointment. He looked at Caleb, a flicker of something akin to respect in his icy eyes. You are more resourceful than I was led to believe, he said quietly. A costly miscalculation. Without another word, he walked out of the land office, out of Coalsville, and out of their lives. The war was over. This time the peace was real. The debts were sold off to a legitimate bank in Cheyenne, which offered fair, long-term terms. The shadow was gone. On a bright spring morning, with the wildflowers blooming across the valley, Caleb and Eliza stood before their friends and neighbors. There was no preacher, only the wide sky and the land they had fought for. Eliza Sallow, Caleb said, his voice rough with emotion, holding her hands in his. You saw the man I could be, not the man I was. You gave me a family. Will you let me spend the rest of my life being that man for you? Tears streamed down her face, but her smile was brilliant. Yes, Caleb Holt, every day. As they kissed, the small crowd, ranchers, widows, a deputy, and a grizzled old liveryman, erupted in cheers. Samuel whooped with joy, his laughter finally free of fear. Redemption, Caleb discovered, wasn't a single act of heroism. It was built day by day, with each repaired fence, each quiet evening on the porch, each lesson taught to a growing boy. It was in the weight of a wedding band and the trust in a woman's eyes. The past would always be a part of him, a scar on his jaw and a memory in his soul. But it no longer defined him. He was no longer the convict from Ironwood or the gunman from Blackwater. He was Caleb Holt, a husband, a father, a man who was finally truly free. And so, the brand of the past was finally overwritten by the promise of the future. If this story of redemption and resilience found a home in your heart, let me know in the comments. What moment stayed with you the most? Your thoughts truly shape the stories we tell. If you journeyed with Caleb until the end, please tap the like button and subscribe to the channel. There are more tales of the West waiting for you. Stories of lost souls finding their way home right here on this channel. Thank you for listening.